Speaker of this session. He's going to speak about law, order and justice, which is very much the topic of the moment. Please welcome Peter Phillips.
Just before I do that, I'd like to mention this was my election address in the local election 2003. So how long ago is that? It's 15 years ago, isn't it? Okay. And I wrote here, police sticking plaster. Despite Surrey Police's staffing problems, we're asking the police to do the almost impossible job of trying to maintain order in our increasingly lawless society. Remember, this is 15 years ago. It's paradise in comparison to
I remember putting it out of you.
Yeah, that's right. It is costing a fortune too. This year, Surrey Police, blah, blah, blah. In many inner city areas, the police are now so overwhelmed by crime that they are like sticking plaster, trying to hold together communities with no cultural or social cohesion, and which we taxpayers are having to pay for. That was 15 years ago I said that, and of course things have got far, far worse since then. And this was an election address, not for me, but someone else standing in our constituency that I wrote. And in view of the news that we're going to have even more foreigners imported to run our health service, I'll just read a little bit here. The BNP would refuse all but emergency treatment to those not entitled to it, reform the management structure, and, this is the key thing, increase the number of training places for British doctors and nurses sufficient to provide fully for all the NHS's future needs. Well, that was 8 years ago. If we'd done that then, we'd certainly have nurses by now, and we'd just start to be getting junior doctors if they'd started then. So, another case of we told them so. Now, my talk today is 10 years ago I gave a lecture to, or a talk to a couple of BNP branches on law and order. And again, 10 years ago was a bit of a paradise in comparison to now, isn't it? But it was bad enough then. And, you know, I outlined why it had got so worse, why crime was 10 times what it was when I was a child in the 1950s. 10 times, so God knows what it is now. And I outlined quite a few things that I thought needed to be done to resurrect the situation. But since then, I think justice has got to be added to those problems. I mean, justice was a little bit wavery then, but I think it's a real problem now. I think most worrying of all is the clear state media and media collusion and repression. And the recent case of Tommy Robinson, who was arrested for causing a disturbance of the peace, appeared in court 2 hours or 3 hours later on a different charge, it was contempt of court, was found guilty by presumably just the judge. Yeah, there's no jury, wasn't there? And whisked off to prison. In 5 bloody hours that happened. I mean, that's the sort of thing that used to happen in communist countries. And yet it's happening here. It was in prison within 5 hours.
Well, that's what we were told it happened in communist countries. I don't know if it really did.
Well, I'm sure it's occurred in quite a few unsavoury countries, okay? But it certainly shouldn't be happening. And clearly that was a demonstration that there was collusion going on there between the police and the judiciary, maybe not the prison service. And that's something I think is the most worrying thing about so-called justice today. But there are several other problems, and I have to say, in front of present company, this is a layman's view of these things, so certain people might not necessarily agree with them. You might be able to correct things I get wrong. But this is the perception of an ordinary law-abiding person. You know what they say is justice must be done, it must be seen to be done. Well, of course, that was the other thing. There was a gagging order put on that sentence that Tommy was given. I mean, it's just outrageous, although it was removed later on. As far as I'm aware, 1/3 of all people who go to court and are found guilty we never hear the names of, for all sorts of reasons, mainly because of age, but not exclusively so. Well, the case that Tommy was reporting on, theoretically we weren't supposed to know the names, although the BBC had announced them. I think we should actually get rid of all anonymity. 1/3 of people that we don't know the names of, we don't know their backgrounds, we don't know anything about them, is too much. And I think we should get rid of a lot. Maybe rape would be the exception, in which case the accused should have anonymity as well. That's the only thing I think we should get rid of. We need more transparency. And there should be no reporting restrictions, unless, except in the cases of national security, which clearly there wasn't in the case of Tommy Robinson. Now, the jury system, we used to be able to rely on the jury system to get a judgment by our fellow peers, 12 of our fellow peers. I think Nick Griffin and Mark Collett got it in their 2 court cases up in Leeds, incidentally, where they had revealed the Muslim grooming that had been going on long before Tommy Robinson
Absolutely.
did. That's forgotten.
2005.
And the jury found that there was no case to answer. But can you rely on the jury system? In our multicultural society, can you rely on the jury system anymore? Because a jury system relies on a cohesive society where everyone has basically the same values, cultural values. But that's not the case anymore. So I think there's quite a possibility of 2 things. One, you'll get bias. If there's a member of your minority community, being accused, you may be likely to find not guilty. You only require 2 people to do that, and they're not guilty. And the other thing, which I think almost certainly happened in the case of Jez, there you had 3 black people, and I think there was 1 Chinese lady, wasn't there, on the jury. And I thought Jez's case was very reasonable, that it was not reasonable for him to be found guilty. And what may well have happened there, you can understand what would happen, is that the white people on the jury would be fearful of being accused of being racist by the other jurors. So there's a number of... So basically what I'm saying is, in multicultural paradises like our major cities, and certainly London, maybe the jury system is not going to work anymore, and then we need to replace it with something else. And the alternative is to have the diploc courts that operate in Northern Ireland, where you have 2 or 3 judges that actually make the decision. However, there's still a problem there. I think it could well come to that. Now, the judiciary, it's interesting what you said about this magistrate. He was a crooked bastard, or whatever words you used. Because I think a lot of the judiciary, yes, well, he's not judiciary. He's not the judiciary. I'm talking about judges and magistrates and lay magistrates. I think, by and large, we can't trust them anymore. In the past, one would have assumed that judges are impartial. They just exercise the law, and they don't take any personal prejudices with them. There have been so many judgments that we've heard, light sentences for people who should have got longer sentences, and sentences at all for people who shouldn't have got sentences. That can we really trust just judiciary anymore? There's a lot of inconsistent judgments. We hear them through the filter of the press, but ridiculous people let off because they're not feeling well, or they've got to look after their children, therefore they shouldn't go to prison or whatever. And then, of course, I think increasingly you're getting bias. Now, I sense that we saw that in Jez's trial, where there's a judge and a jury. He struck me as being very hostile, particularly in his summing up. You can't prove anything, though. And then I also went to the Britain First case, the 2 people, Paul and Jada, in Folkestone. I went to sit on that. That was a magistrates' court. And I thought there was a certain amount of bias there. Now, this is a summary of what first of all, this is, I don't know whether you can advise me, this is called lawpages.com. Is that a private thing, or is that a semi-government?
It's not official.
It's not official. But they described it as such. This was just Paul. He was found guilty of religiously aggravated harassment in Ramsgate, Kent in May 2017. He was found not guilty on 2 further counts of religiously aggravated harassment. This is the key thing. It says, he is leader of the far-right group Britain First. Well, I would expect in an organisation like this that is supposedly reporting impartially on cases, that he shouldn't be saying that that's the matter of opinion whether it's far-right. But there you are, there it is. And then they've got a summary of what the judge is summing up. And I mean, basically, it's quite clear, it's just opinion, because that's what that case was about, it's an opinion. It's not, there was no question about what they did, there was rather a lot of shouting and going on, which perhaps was undesirable. But, you know, the actual reasoning, but their reasoning behind it was what the judge was trying to get at. That was his opinion.
Do you want to do the end?
It's a bit too long. If I got time later, you can have a copy, you can have a look. So that's that. I think because the judiciary is getting, in a layman's eyes, untrustworthy, I think we need more transparency about what their backgrounds are. I think we need to know if they belong to any secret societies. Now, I'm thinking particularly of Common Purpose, which is a particularly insidious one at the moment, very left-wing. I think we ought to know whether they're members of that or they've been on training courses or whatever it is. And of course, I do include the Masons as well. Now, there may be Masons amongst us, and I'm sure there are. Well, I actually know a Mason who I'm amazed when he revealed it to me. I couldn't believe it. So it's okay to belong to these societies, but I think we should know about it, so that when judgments are made, we can make our own assessment whether about bias has crept into it. And I think we should know about their religion too. That would have been interesting in both Jez's case and Alison's case. I would have liked to have known that. You never know. And I think that concealment, if you don't reveal what you're required by law, that's what I would suggest, to reveal, it should be a criminal offence with criminal penalties. So there's a price to pay if you lie. Because I think we do need to know more about these people. And then I think, basically, the judiciary does need monitoring. I mean, lots of professional institutes have professional monitoring bodies. I know mine does, and it has a majority of lay people on it, actually. It's a new question, but... So we should know that this monitoring body should question their sentencing record, how consistent it is with the general guidance that is given on sentences, seek any evidence of bias, and if they are found wanting, I think they should be removed. That's what happens to some of my profession when they are found wanting. But then you've got to ask the question: well, who would do the monitoring? Because you've got to appoint someone to do the monitoring. How do you select them? So I don't profess to know the answer to that, but I think something needs to be done. And finally, let's get rid of the bloody wigs. I think wigs just give the impression that this is a class of body that's above us, whereas I think it's much better in America. You don't have the wigs, so the judiciary, the people are judging you on you. One has the perception that they are one of you. I think you'll disagree with me on that. Yes. I think I get the impression that there needs to be more sentence and guidance, and there seems to be a lot of flexibility in the guidance. You have the maximum sentences and minimum sentences, and I know there are set categories in between for certain types of crime. But it does seem to me that, one judge, remember Judge Jeffries, he was notorious for hanging people, wasn't he? Well, that indicated to me that at that time, he was able to give his own justice, his own sentencing, rather than an accepted standard of sentencing throughout the country. So I don't think it was really. Inefficiency. I've never been to a court before, and in the last few weeks I've been to both magistrates' courts and the Crown Court. And I'm staggered at the inefficiency, or what looks like the inefficiency. The time that's wasted, people backwards and forwards. We went several times for Alison's case. And in Alison's case, she doesn't mind my mentioning her, for this a crime which she should never have been found guilty of. I mean, it just wasn't a crime, but there she was. She had several arrests, multiple charges, 10 court hearings. 10 court hearings.
It was persecution.
18 months on bail and 2 days in jail. And now, of course, you've got more on top. Now you've been found wicked and evil and guilty. But, you know, I don't know the facts about it, but I got a perception. I mean, they started at supposedly 10 o'clock, but they wouldn't start until 10:30, maybe 11 o'clock. There's no discipline. And something definitely needs to be done about that, I think. Now, the police, they're part of the judiciary, aren't they, in a way? They're becoming even more politicised than when I mentioned them 10 years ago. They were politicised then, but of course they're obsessed with politically correct so-called crimes, and they ignore blatant criminality from people, well, from many people, but people like Antifa, and yet they arrest innocents, like the guy who happened to murder a burglar who entered his house in, where was that?
Hither Green.
Hither Green.
Not murder.
Well, killed, yes. Well, he was, you know, they arrested him on murder, didn't they? But I think it was probably only public pressure and to their small accolade, the press, that caused them to withdraw on that. But I mean, there's just no consistency, and it's always against ordinary law-abiding British people, which I think by and large we are here. And also, they're making law by interpretation.
Yeah.
Now, this is the College of Policing, all right? Professional body for policing. Hate crime operational guidance. How many pages is it? Let me see. 132 pages about all the different types of hate crime and persecution, what have you. And I'll just read you little bits about so-called anti-Semitism. I mean, it's not just about anti-Semitism. The same calibre of advice is given on all these different categories. But here's one. Calling for, contemporary examples of anti-Semitism in public life, the media, schools, the workplace, and the religious sphere. Well, that covers just about everything, doesn't it? Could include, but are not limited to, first of all, calling for, aiding, or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology or an extremist view of religion. Well, that's all right, nothing wrong with that. Next one. Making mendacious, dehumanising, demonising or stereotypical allegations about Jews as individuals, or the power of Jews as a collective, including especially, but not exclusively, the myth about the world Jewish conspiracy, or of Jews controlling the media, economy, government, or other societal institutions. Well, of course, that's what they got Jez on, didn't they? But this is advice, and advice, I know from past experience in my profession, you'd get guidance from all sorts of bodies, local authorities, but you knew that the guidance was actually rules. There was no guidance about it. Those were the rules. But this is the worst one. Denying the fact, scope, mechanisms, for example, gas chambers, or intentionality of the genocide of the Jewish people at the hands of National Socialist Germany and its supporters and accomplices during World War II, in brackets, the Holocaust. That is outrageous, that, because there was an attempt, I can't remember when, to actually make Holocaust denial so-called.
In 97,
Right.
Tony Blair promised that he'd bring it into law, but then he dropped it.
Oh, right. I thought it went to court, and I thought it went to Parliament, and Parliament refused. Oh, right. Well, anyway, so in this country, it's not a crime. It's still not a crime theoretically to question the Holocaust, as I now do. I never used to, but I've read quite a lot in the last couple of years that have convinced me that at the very least there are questions to be asked. And yet here it is. The police are saying, well, it is illegal.
It's a crime.
Yeah, and there are others.
Are they saying it's a hate incident or a hate crime?
These are examples of anti-Semitism. I mean, I don't know whether anti-Semitism is on the statute, is it? Do you know?
No.
It's not defined legally.
They were called hate incidents, which are hate crimes. So they're probably examples of what they would regard as hate incidents rather than hate crimes, I suspect.
Well, that's not how it says it, but it just shouldn't be in a document like this. It's not for the police to be making law, which is what they're trying to do. And so specific, I mean, it's not as if it's even general. Anyway, so that was just an example of that. And I think, rather like the judiciary, I didn't actually say the judiciary, but if this monitoring body finds certain judges and JPs wanting, then they should be able to be removed from their position. And I think the same should apply to chief constables. I mean, it's pie in the sky at the moment to expect that, but it should happen. Like the dreadful one that we have, what's her name, Cressida Dick, running...
She's got the apt surname.
Dick, yeah, I know, isn't it? But absolutely disaster. And then there's more sort of root causes of declining justice. First of all, obviously, as I've sort of hinted at it, there's the destruction of our cohesive society with mass immigration, hence the juries less likely to work. And also, not necessarily connected to that, but it's the what I call compartmentalisation of society, what's commonly known as identity politics. So society is being subdivided into race, religion, disability, gender, sexual orientation, and the most recent one is transgender orientation. That's going through Parliament now. And of course, giving them special rights and privileges, that further destroys the cohesive. You know, if we're going to be a successful society, as we once were, we've got to be a cohesive society. The fact that we're so disparate now is one of the reasons we're just failing. And of course, an effect of a lot of this discrimination against so-called minorities means that it's effective discrimination of straight, white, able-bodied young males. Why not just get rid of all this and just have a law saying you can discriminate against straight, white, able-bodied young males? Because that's what it amounts to.
Absolutely, here.
But most destructive is the race and hate crime legislation that we've had drip-fed, haven't we, over the last 20 years or whatever it is.
50.
Because it's criminalising human emotions. You know, we all have feelings about this, as do the Muslims and all the other groups. They must have feelings about us. And if you let slip, you lose your temper or something, it's a serious thing. And of course, most important, probably more important, is the fact it's now being used to limit free speech, as it was in the case of Alison, Jez, and the two people from Britain First. And of course, there are only 4 examples of what's going on. For saying things that only 15 or 20 years ago would not have been criminal at all, and certainly wouldn't be criminal in America, where they have the First Amendment. By God, don't we need a First Amendment here, as well as a Bill of Rights? So, really, partly to solve this problem, we need to abolish all the hate, race and identity legislation, get back to being as best we can a cohesive society. None of this was necessary, because the law always said that incitement to violence was a criminal activity, So why do we need all these extra so-called protections? It was a criminal offence. Not much now. Then the establishment. Why is the establishment doing this to us?
Why?
Because, I mean, you mentioned your monitoring board. You know, obviously there were some people like us, and yet you got so little support. There must be many reasons for it, because I can't believe all of the establishment who are doing this to us, falling into line, are doing it with a willing heart. They're doing it for other reasons. One thing I think is what I call the golden handcuffs of particularly the public sector: secure jobs, often high salaries for people in important positions, and more than anything, generous pensions. They've got a lot to lose if they step out of line and they're criticised and hauled before the kangaroo courts or whatever. And with that, the power of patronage. I remember Wedgwood Ben. I mean, he was a bit of a nutter in many ways, but he had a series on the radio, I don't know, 30 years ago now, about the power of patronage. And it enlightened me, you know, getting gongs is one thing. People get gong. If they keep in line, they'll get a gong. Or they'll get a nice promotion to a senior position on a quango or something like that. That's all part of patronage. It's the power of patronage. And I thought for once he'd got something absolutely right. And so finally, it strikes me now that there is a conspiracy to destroy our country. When you've got politicians, the media, the people with the money, all colluding, quite clearly colluding now. I think they are deliberately trying to destroy our country for a good reason, and I won't say who I'm talking about.
Thank you, Peter.
Now, can I just add that it's been never more urgent that all the nationalist groups, whether you include UKIP in that for Britain in that, it's never been more urgent that we get together, particularly with our first past the post system. How it will come about, if it will ever come about, I don't know. But if we don't, I'm afraid we're finished.
Yeah.
As a country, we're finished.
Yeah, I do believe that.
I would like to come here. I'd like to say this after Tess was speaking, but she went on another subject. Tess was talking how absolutely dreadful Lewisham is. Now, I remember, as other people in this room do, what Lewisham was like 40 years ago, and now it's a very, very dangerous place, an anti-British place.
It is.
And Tess was saying how dreadful it is. But, there's a huge but. We are living in unprecedented times. Never mind our footling little problems in nationalism, never mind them. We have witnessed in this last 2 years 63 million people vote for the absolute outsider in the United States of America, Donald Trump. Clearly, with the whole establishment against the man, 63 million Americans had the guts to go and vote for Trump, the man they knew they weren't to vote for. And similarly in Britain, 17.5 million people voted for Brexit. And it was quite clear that we weren't supposed to vote for Brexit. To quote Pat Buchanan, you are witnessing a peasants' revolt, the like of which we've not seen before. And somewhere along the line, we nationalists will sort ourselves out. But the big picture is, there's a peasants' revolt going on, and that is the most healthiest sign that we've seen for a long time.
But Richard,